Welcome, everybody, into the Big Ten Show. I'm your host, Adam Carriker, and I'm joined by a special guest today. But before I bring Brandon on, make sure you go and see what our friends at the Jacobson Seed Company are all about. They are your healthy hybrid advantage farmers. Thanks for watching the Big Ten Show. But we can give you more than just great Big Ten coverage. We can help you with your fields as well. Go to jacobsonseed.com. That's jacobsonseed.com, the Jacobson Seed Company, your healthy hybrid advantage. All right, I am joined by Michigan insider, author of Wolverine Digest on Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated contributor, Mr. Brandon Brown. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good, and I must admit, I'm from farm country. The seed company, just to get us started, man, I love it. I feel like I'm sitting right at home right now.
It's awesome, and they're awesome people. And I went and did an appearance for them, a speaking
Oh
gig
no.
for them, and just get to meet them in person after chatting with them and getting to know them. Great people behind a great company. So, dude, Michigan football. There's like nothing to. What in the world could we talk about? There's nothing going on in Ann Arbor, Michigan. All right, let's talk about it though. The loss of Jim Harbaugh. How big a deal is this? How much is this going to matter? I've talked to some Michigan folks who didn't necessarily want him to go, but it's kind of one of those things where there was a lot of things surrounding him and they will no longer surround Michigan at least as much. So maybe it's not that bad. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I mean, Jim Harbaugh's been a polarizing dude everywhere he's been. He kind of wears
Mhm.
out his welcome at places, but he was at Michigan for 9 years. So I mean,
Yep.
he's a really good coach. He just went 15-0, won the national title. So obviously he's an elite coach. He's getting elite money to go back to the NFL. Like that's all fine and dandy. I think things are going to be difficult for it. They ended up naming Sherrone Moore the
Mhm.
head coach, who was the O line coach for the last couple of years. It's going to be tricky for him. It's going to be difficult for him. But I think it was going to be difficult for Jim Harbaugh if he came back,
Mhm.
just because of all the other stuff. I mean, the expanded playoff makes things a little different, kind of changes the way regular season games feel a little bit. NIL has been a struggle at Michigan, and it seems to be kind of popping up now more than ever. The transfer portal has been a little difficult for Michigan. Other teams are just killing it, whereas Michigan's always had a little bit of a pause with admissions or whatever the case may be. That schedule next year is brutal,
Yep.
absolutely brutal.
Yep.
And Michigan literally might put like 20 dudes in the NFL this year. So it was going to be a big struggle in 2024, no matter who was at the helm. But Sherrone Moore's never been a head coach before, other than his 4-game interim stint
Yeah.
during this past season, and he did win some really big games. There's no question, but it's a big deal. I mean, I'm not even like president of the Jim Harbaugh fan club. I'm really not. Like,
Mhm.
I was ready to blast him to the moon in 2020. I lost a lot of followers. I got a lot of heat. People thought I was some hater, but I just after 6 years in 2020, I didn't think he was getting it done. But the last 3 years have been incredible. He has hit home run higher after home run higher. He has implemented the exact style that Michigan needed to beat Ohio State and to win the Big Ten and obviously win a Natty. But it was going to be tricky for anybody. But yeah, it's a huge deal. I mean, it's whether you love him or hate him, he wins everywhere he goes, and he's proven that at multiple stops.
I think you make a phenomenal point. No matter who the head coach was next year, let's say Harbaugh stayed.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it's almost impossible not to take a step back because you just went 15-0 and won the
Yeah.
national championship. So unless you do it again, it's technically a step back. But beyond that, and we chatted about this previously, you lose all your starting offensive linemen, you lose J.J. McCarthy, your starting quarterback. The tall schedule. Holy crap. I wrote it down and I made some notes, and we can go through that in a minute if you like. Like, no matter who the head coach was, it was going to be challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then you talk about Harbaugh leaving. All right, now the strength coach, who he called his X factor. All right, Ben Herbert has gone to the Chargers. Now, have they officially named a new strength coach yet? I know Justin Tress was going to be the guy, or that was the thought. Has he officially been named the guy yet?
So I mean, that was kind of the story that you bring up a good point. Actually, I don't know if we've gotten like an official release
Yeah.
from the university, and they've been doing that along the way. Obviously when Sherrone got the job, it was a big deal, and there was
Hmm.
media and everything. They wouldn't do that for the strength coach, but I don't
Yeah.
think the university has put out like an official release yet, and they typically do that when there's kind of a change at the top. And you mentioned Ben Herbert; he was named associate head coach. Like Jim
Hmm.
Harbaugh raved about that guy. He nominated him for the Broyles Award, even though he wasn't even technically eligible. Which that's just another funny Jim Harbaugh thing. He's like, "Oh, strength coaches can't get it. Well, I'm going to nominate him anyway." But then he made him an
Yep.
associate head coach, and he was as big a part of the culture change and why players developed as anybody on that staff. And it looked like he was going to stay, and then now he's leaving, and that's a major loss too. So yeah, it's as far as I know, it is Justin Tress, but you're right. I don't think there's been an official release on that.
So Justin Tress, for those who may not know, he's the Wolverines' associate director of strength and conditioning. We assume he's the next strength and conditioning coach
Mhm.
as well. And it's interesting because I think strength coaches get overlooked. Okay, Ben Herbert. I could make a strong argument the strength coaches spend more time with players than the actual
Mhm.
position coaches. Position coaches really get you sporadically during the winter, kind of, but spring ball and during the season. The strength coaches get you during spring ball, the season, and almost the rest of the year. There's some breaks in there after bowl games and right before you go into summer conditioning and whatnot. But they spend as much or more time with players than anybody. And I've often wondered to myself, how can you? It's a different culture, just generally in the world today. And we don't have to go off in the weeds to that, but how do you instill toughness and be in a physical team when it's just kind of a different culture in general and kids might react differently than they used to that? You start with the strength coach. You start with being bigger, faster, stronger, the mentality he instills in the weight room, and then it's easier for the football coaches to do so. Now they got a new O-line coach as well. All right, Grant Newsome, who's been the tight ends coach for the past couple of years. So essentially, we assume Tress, there is promotion within.
Mhm.
Moore is a promotion within. Grant Newsome is a promotion within. What are your thoughts on Newsome as the new O-line coach and all this promoting from within that Michigan's doing?
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons. I mean, if you're and Michigan loves this. They love the Michigan
Hmm.
man thing, and I think it. Sometimes it's limiting. You've got this. You can't quite call it an endless pool at this point because of the time of the year. I mean, the carousel's been spinning for a
Hmm.
while now, and Michigan was still playing, and Jim Harbaugh was making his decision. So that doesn't help when you're trying to fill vacancies at this point. But I like all those guys. I mean, Grant Newsome, he's younger, but he played the position at a high level at Michigan. He had to unfortunately medically retire after a gruesome leg injury. Otherwise, he'd probably be in the NFL. I mean, he was a starter as a true freshman at left tackle, which doesn't happen at Michigan hardly ever.
Mm-mm. Yep.
Um, he's a super bright dude. The players love him. He handles himself really well. You'd never guess he was in his mid-20s if you talk to him, but that's probably a more comfortable fit for him. He was coaching tight ends.
Hmm.
He didn't play tight end, but he's a smart guy. He learned from Sherrone, and now he's kind of the next Sherrone. That's kind of what it feels like. Sherrone Moore was the tight ends coach when Grant Newsome was a GA. Sherrone moved up to O line. Grant slid into tight end. Now Sherrone's the head coach.
Hmm.
He slides up to O. So it's kind of been like this natural progression. I don't know that much about Justin Tress. I just, we don't interact with the strength and conditioning coaches
Hmm.
very often as members of the media. So I don't know that much about him. But again, learning from Herbert's not a bad way to go. And you get some continuity there, and the players are familiar. But these guys were elite at what they did. I mean, Sherrone Moore, won the Joe Moore Award 2 years in a row. He's been the OC. Ben Herbert was, I think, the highest paid strength coach in the country, or if not, he was right at the top. And
Making like
again,
$1 million or more a year. Yeah.
yeah, very respected by Harbaugh. Obviously, took him with him to the pros. So you're losing elite guys and hoping that these quote unquote fill-ins can do a good
Hmm.
enough job to continue things because Michigan's been so good the last 3 years. But I've never loved, and it does feel like Michigan only looks within sometimes. I don't know if that's how it went so far, but the way these vacancies have been filled, it doesn't look like there was a national search or let's go find the absolute best guy. Let's just keep it in house. We've got some good people, and hopefully they'll be good. But yeah, I go back and forth on the in house thing. I think there's certainly pros to it, but I think there are some cons as well.
The feeling I get when I talk to Michigan folks right now, nobody's going to say, well, we expect to step back, but they kind of expect it. Okay. But I don't get the feeling it's like an impatience, like, oh man, if we aren't in that top four, if we don't win a Big Ten
Mhm.
title, Moore's job is in trouble. I don't get that feeling at all. Kind of like maybe Ryan Day maybe had a little bit with Ohio State because a lot of people felt like he was born on third base. Right,
Mhm.
that program was really built back by Meyer and handed to Ryan Day, and all he had to do was just not screw it up in some people's minds. Whether that's fair or not, we can debate. You could argue a similar case for Sherrone Moore now we just talked about everything that's different and more challenging for Michigan and how it would be harder for Harbaugh. But my question is this: what would be a successful season for Michigan next year? Do they have to beat Ohio State? Do they have to be in the top 4? Do they just have to make the college football playoff? What in your mind is a successful season for Michigan fans in their minds next year?
Man, after 3 years, after three
Yep.
years in a row, the 3-year run that they've just had, it is a tough spot for. It's like you said, if you don't go 15-0 and win it
Mhm.
all, technically you're moving backwards, and that's
Mhm.
pretty unfair for a first
Yep.
year head coach who's a young guy and he's dealing with all these things we talked about: new coordinators, multiple new position coaches, tons of personnel change, the schedule, which is nuts. It's a very unlikely scenario that it happens. Like, you could probably bet every penny you've ever made in your entire life and be comfortable with it. They're not going to go
Mhm.
15-0
Yep.
and win the whole thing again. They're just not. Like, it's only happened what, 4 times in college football
Mhm.
anyway. So you have to imagine some sort of a step back. So, man, if Sherrone stepping into this position in his first year, he's got to go on the road to play Ohio State this year. It's back in Columbus. They have absolutely reloaded when it comes to the transfer
Yep.
portal. They've always recruited well. That's not really anything new, but they've hit the transfer portal even harder this year. Got some of the best players at their respective positions across the board, and Michigan hasn't really done that. Again, they were in kind of a weirder spot because they were still playing, and Jim Harbaugh was in limbo, so you weren't able to go out there and chase these portal guys. And now you've got all this turnover and personnel changes, and the roster looks completely different. Man, I hate the idea of putting a number on it, but I think if you fall short of like 10 games, people are going to be like, is this the guy? Is this, after
Mhm.
15-0, now he can't even get to double digit wins? Like, who is this guy? And I love Sherrone. I've known him since he was at CMU. So I just think he's in a really tough spot. But I think if they don't win 10 games and you lose to Ohio State and you're not back in the Big Ten championship, people are going to already be thinking, oh man, we miss Harbaugh. I just feel like that's how it's going to go, and
Mhm.
I think that's pretty unfair because I think that's probably the realistic outcome.
So for me, I look at it similar to you, but slightly different. I look at it from a college football playoff perspective. To me,
Mhm.
if they're going to have to be one of the top 10 teams because there's 12 teams that get in. There's 6 auto bids, so there's going to be 2 G5 teams that get in until we fix how this thing is selected within the 12 teams and seeded and all that. So you got to be in the top 10. So to me, I kind of think they got to get in the college football playoff. As long as they do that, whether they win or lose, as long as they don't just get waxed in the first round if they were to lose, then
Mhm.
I think in my mind that would be a successful year knowing what's going on, at least for me anyways. But we've referenced this schedule a couple of times. So I went ahead and wrote this bad boy down. You start right off with Fresno State, who by the way started 8-1 last year and in their first 3 games had 2 Power 5 wins over Purdue and Arizona State. So they're not just a gimme win,
It's
okay?
not a cupcake, no.
Yeah, then you got Texas. That might be a little bit of a challenge. Arkansas State might be the easiest game that they have, if you want to look at it that way. Then you got USC, and I never know what to make of the freaking Trojans.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just say CFP potential without a doubt. Okay, and if they play any defense at all, probably. Who knows if they will. Then you got Minnesota. Okay, now the nice thing about those first 5 games, they're all in Ann Arbor. That is at least helpful. Then you go to Seattle. Washington's not going to be the same team, probably not even close, but it's still on the road. Seattle's a tough place to play, and they did just finish number 2 in the country at Illinois. Then you got Michigan State, an in-state rivalry game, which is always going to be tough. Oregon, who just finished number 6 in the country, coming to Ann Arbor. Now, again, these first 9 games, there's only 2 road games. So there's a lot of games played
Mhm.
in Ann Arbor. Then you go to Bloomington to play Indiana. You got Northwestern and then at Ohio State, all right, who, as we know, just finished 10th in the country. So that's 8 home games, 4 road games. But even beyond that, 4 teams have finished in the top 10 this past year, and that doesn't include USC. That doesn't include rival Michigan State. The way I looked at it, it's like 6 brutal games, okay? And then you've got Fresno State, which isn't a gimme. Then you've got Big Ten opponents. Outside of Arkansas State, I don't see per se an easy game on this entire schedule. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, the only playoff team not on the schedule is Alabama. That's
Yep.
crazy. Like, I mean,
Yeah, that is
yes,
crazy.
Michael
Yep.
Penix is gone. I understand. They're Washington with the coaching change. Jed Fish, though, He was at Michigan under Harbaugh. I thought if Harbaugh left, give
Mhm.
that dude a call. It was,
Yep.
again, the timing wasn't there. He took the job at Washington when all those pieces started to fall, Nick Saban's retirement, etc. But he's an offensive guy. He's gonna be bringing some athletes. They lose a lot too. Like you look at Washington's roster,
Mhm.
that's not the
Yep.
team that Michigan just played in the national title game.
Mhm.
Texas is going to be damn good. I mean, they return their quarterback, which the other playoff teams do not. Um, it's so funny because this last year, everybody, like so many Michigan fans, just and everybody, the national narrative for 10
Mhm.
weeks was Michigan hasn't played anybody. That home schedule is a joke.
Mhm.
They could have rolled out of bed without Jim Harbaugh up until November and been
Mhm.
undefeated. That's not the case next year. There are challenges, laced throughout the whole schedule. Like you said, even Fresno State, which
Mhm.
I don't know was probably scheduled 6 years ago or something.
Mhm.
They were a quality football team last year. It should be a win, and Michigan will probably be favored by a decent amount, but got to show up and play that one. But then you name those other ones. You've got all the new teams in the Big Ten that Michigan will play. Three of them: USC, Oregon, Washington. And
Mhm.
then, oh, by the way, Texas, which just throw that on there for a non-conference game that was scheduled again probably six
Yeah.
or 8 years ago. It's
Yep.
it's
Not
just
with this.
brutal. Though.
It wasn't scheduled with this conference schedule in mind. I'll tell you
Right,
that right now. No way.
right, exactly. So you've got with Michigan, you've got three of the four playoff teams represented on that schedule. Yeah, and you mentioned two Columbus. It's brutal. I mean, they're different, yes, because quarterbacks are gone, players are gone. Some of the best players from those teams are moving on, but those are still opponents that Michigan has just never had to deal with before with the new Big Ten and all that stuff, and again the non-conference game with Texas. So incredibly challenging. Again, even if Jim Harbaugh were back and you weren't losing your entire offense and most of your most veteran players on defense, it would be a challenge.
So I actually went through and I did a way too early, but for fun, record prediction. And so
All
after the
right.
first 5 games, I actually had them going 4-1. Now that USC game, I have no idea what to make of the
Mm.
Trojans ever. They tend to be better early on than late in the season, which may or may not be good for Michigan fans. But I got them 4-1. I was like, holy crap, that's a better start than I thought. Then after 9 games, I actually had them 7-2. So the two losses that I have are Texas and Oregon up to this
Mhm.
point. Okay, then in the final 3 games, I haven't beaten Indiana Northwestern. I had them losing on the road at Ohio State. Okay, and I was like, man, that seems awfully generous. So I've got them either at 9-3, or if they lose to USC, 8-4. Now, my question for you: what is your win-loss record prediction, and will it get them into the CFP 12-team playoff next year?
So I think if you look at the schedule, so you've got Texas. I think it's a 5 game schedule. Every year you can kind of do this with Michigan. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
hope that they don't trip up and lose to a Minnesota or an Illinois on the road or whatever. But you
Yeah,
got to play them, and that happens. I mean, Ohio State got pants by Purdue. It's like these things
I
happen.
remember.
Like it's
Yep.
rare, but it does happen. But I think it's a 5 game schedule, and it's those teams we just talked about. It's Texas, it's Washington, Oregon, USC, Ohio State. That's it. It's those
Yep.
5 games. Michigan State's not ready to compete yet, I don't think. First year head coach, they're going to be breaking in a freshman
Mm-hmm.
quarterback. It's a rivalry game, and it will be in East. No, it's back in Ann Arbor. Sorry about
It's
that. They just
In Ann Arbor.
yeah,
Yeah.
they beat them in East Lansing really bad this past season. So that's a home game. They're not ready, but those 5 games, you got to win 3 of them, and so that there's your record probably 9-3, 10-2, somewhere in there. It does sound too generous. Maybe it is. But if they do go say 8-4 or even 9-3, if you look at where the teams finished this past season, that wouldn't be good enough to make it to the
Mm-hmm.
playoff more than likely. So I'd say you got to get to 10-2. That's that mark in my head. Just win 10 games. You'll probably get in the playoff. That'll be another double-digit season, double-digit win season. I don't know how you could be mad at Sherrone Moore for that, even if it is a loss in Columbus and one of these new Big Ten teams. So if they lose 3, I don't know. I don't know if that's good enough to get. You'd have to think 8 to 10 Power 5 teams will have 2 losses or less, and then you mentioned Southern group of 5 guys. However, they figure that out. I don't know if 9-3 gets you in the playoff, even with 12 teams. I don't know if it will.
I'm curious about one thing because college football, and I'll never forget when I first got to the Rams, my D coordinator Jim Haslett was like, "Oh, you're used to playing No Name You," and then followed by Never Heard of Ya College, and he's like, "No, we're playing the Panthers and the Niners and
Yeah.
every week is a battle in the NFL. There's no weeks off, and because anybody can literally beat anybody on any given Sunday." I look at this schedule, and there are 5 teams that stand out, but I'm curious because college football players have never had to week in and week out show up every single week without I don't want to say letdown games before, but I mentioned a lot of those games because there's a huge difference between playing 3 Arkansas states in your non-conference or teams like that and Fresno, Texas, Arkansas State, because now you've got to be up week after week way more than you've ever been, or you get beat by a team that you are clearly better than, because that just happens. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. The other thing, my other thought is SEC Big Ten. Their schedules are so much harder, okay, than the Big 12, the ACC. And so personally, if I'm a voter, if there's a 10-2 Big 12 ACC team and a 9-3 Big 10 SEC team, I'm putting the 9-3 team in, and I'm not even thinking twice about it. So I think 9-3 gets you in. I think if I'm a Big 12 ACC team, I got to be like 11-1, or
Yeah.
I'm thinking I'm in trouble compared to Big 10 SEC teams with the at-large college football playoff bids. What do you think?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, like it does change things when all of a sudden you look at the Big Ten, which was really good last year, or good at the top. I mean, you can make a debate on the middle
Yep.
and certainly not so great at the bottom. But now you put USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA in there. It's a completely different conference. All 4 of those teams are in the top third. So that's probably fair. I was just trying to pull up the ranking. So after championship weekend last year, the highest ranked 3-loss team was LSU, and they were 13. So they were on the outside looking in. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, will that be a little different with the new conferences and the way things are laid out? And you certainly look at strength of schedule a little differently now. I've always been curious how much they even care about it. It seems like sometimes they do care about it, sometimes they don't. You get credit for a close loss if it's against a good team more than a win in
I
some
hate
game. I'm
that.
like,
I
what
hate
it
that, by the way.
doesn't a win mean more no matter what? Like anyway,
Yep.
so you may be right. It's a lot of there's a lot of changes this year. But just kind of generally, historically, there's enough teams that are undefeated or 1 or 2 losses. I think it's tough for a 3-loss team to get in. But I guess that's one of the fun things about how this year is going to look. You've got 12 teams getting in now, and we don't know how it's going to work exactly. And the committee will inevitably piss off like half the country anyway. So we'll let them
Yep.
figure it out. But yeah, last year 3 losses wouldn't have been good enough. So it's going to be fun to watch how that plays out in 2024. Yeah, that's bad. That's a bad look for the Big 12. But it's one of those
Yeah.
things where you look at that map. I mean, outside of the state of Texas, which now Texas not even in the Big 12 anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
that's so weird to say. But
Yep.
outside of the state of Texas, the Big 12 footprint doesn't have a lot of those high end blue chip prospects. They're in the South, they're out west. And again, there's a bunch in Texas, but now that's not even really Big 12 anymore. So yeah, that's again the shifting of these conferences, these mega conferences. You take whatever the Big 12 used to have as the power players, and they're not there anymore. That's
Mm-hmm.
tough. And so yeah, that there's yet another factor to the Final 12. So it's going to be it's like a new sport. Almost has been a
Mm-hmm.
new sport really for like the last 3 or 4 years with NIL, and then you've got transfer portal, and now the conferences and the playoff. It's a wild west out there, man.
I think it's going to eventually be the Power 2
Mm.
with SEC Big 10. Then the next 2, or however they want to phrase the ACC Big 12, and then everybody else.
Yeah,
But to be clear, Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M are in the top 20, but they're in the SEC.
they're not Big 12 anymore. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Brandon for joining me. Thank you all as well. We'll see you next time.